Commander Jake Morrison stood at the observation window of the diplomatic vessel Horizon and watched as Centauri Prime grew larger in the viewport. The planet was beautiful in a way that made Earth seem small and insignificant. 3 silver rings circled the world, and massive structures floated in orbit like jewels hanging in the darkness of space. This was the heart of galactic civilization, and Jake was about to step into a room with beings who had ruled the stars for 10,000 years. Lieutenant Sophie Hayes approached from behind and stood beside him. She was young for a diplomat, but her mind could process alien languages faster than any computer Earth had ever built. Her hands were shaking slightly, and Jake noticed but said nothing. Dr. Henry Blake was checking his equipment for the 100th time and muttering about xenobiological protocols. Security Chief Nicole Grant stood near the door with her arms crossed and her eyes scanning everything like she expected an attack at any moment. The Horizon had left Earth 3 months ago, carrying humanity's hopes for a peaceful future among the stars. First contact had happened 2 years earlier, when a Galactic Council survey ship had stumbled upon human transmissions. The Council had been surprised to find another intelligent species, and even more surprised to discover that humanity had developed faster than light travel on their own. Without guidance from the established galactic powers, that independence had made some Council members nervous. Jake had read every report about the Galactic Council that Earth intelligence could gather. 47 species working together under the leadership of the Vakreen, who were ancient and powerful, and utterly convinced of their own superiority. The Council maintained order through a combination of shared technology and overwhelming military force. Species who joined the Council agreed to follow its laws, and in return they received access to advanced technology and protection from external threats. It seemed like a fair deal on the surface, but Jake had noticed something troubling in the reports. Every species that joined the Council gave up something important, and that something was always there. Independence. The Horizon docked at the orbital station above Centauri Prime, and Jake led his team through corridors that seemed designed to make visitors feel small. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, and the walls were covered in symbols from dozens of different writing systems. Alien beings moved past them without a second glance, and Jake realized that humanity was not special here. They were just another species seeking admission to a club that had existed since before human civilization had discovered fire. The Council chambers were vast beyond imagination. The room could have held 1,000 beings, and it seemed like most of those seats were filled. Jake saw creatures that looked like living crystals sitting next to beings made of what appeared to be liquid metal. There were aliens with 6 legs and aliens with no legs at all. Some breathed oxygen like humans, while others wore environmental suits that hissed and bubbled with exotic atmospheres. Sophie whispered translations in his ear as various representatives spoke to each other in languages that sounded like music or grinding stone or electrical static. At the center of it all sat the Vakreen Prime Counselor. Zurkath was tall and thin, with skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His eyes were completely black, and when he looked at Jake it felt like being examined by something cold and clinical. The Vakreen had ruled the Council since its founding, and they showed no signs of giving up that power. Zurkath raised one long-fingered hand, and the chamber fell silent. The negotiations began badly and got worse. Zurkath spoke in a voice that echoed through the chamber without any visible amplification. He welcomed humanity to the galactic community, and then immediately began listing the conditions for Earth's membership. Humanity would be required to halt all military expansion beyond the solar system. Earth would submit its artificial intelligence research to Council oversight. Human faster-than-light technology would be restricted to approved vessels only. The list went on, and with each new restriction, Jake felt his jaw tightening. Sophie translated the responses from other Council members, and Jake realized that not everyone agreed with the Vakreen approach. Some of the younger species seemed uncomfortable with the harsh terms being offered. The Tauran clan's representative actually spoke up to suggest that humanity should be given more freedom to develop at their own pace. Zurkath dismissed the objection with a wave of his hand. When it was finally Jake's turn to speak, he stood up and looked around the chamber at all those alien faces. He thought about Earth and the billions of people waiting to hear what would happen at this meeting. He thought about the scientists and engineers who had built the Horizon without any help from galactic technology. He thought about every human who had ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of walking among them as equals, not as subjects. Jake Morrison refused the Council's terms. He spoke clearly and calmly and explained that humanity had not crossed the stars just to trade one form of control for another. Earth would happily engage in trade and cultural exchange with the Galactic Council. Humanity would respect the laws and territories of other species, but Earth would not surrender its right to defend itself or to develop technology, or to explore the galaxy freely. Those rights were not negotiable. The chamber erupted in shocked voices that rose and fell like waves. No species had ever refused the Council's terms outright. Some aliens seemed impressed by Jake's boldness while others looked horrified. Zerkath's expression did not change, but his black eyes seemed to grow even darker. The Vecreen Prime Counselor called for order, and the chamber fell silent again. He stated that humanity's refusal demonstrated exactly why they were too dangerous to be allowed unrestricted development. The human species had a violent history, and had nearly destroyed themselves multiple times with nuclear weapons and environmental destruction. They advanced too quickly and took too many risks. A species like that could not be trusted to operate independently in galactic space. Jake started to respond, but Zerkath held up his hand. Council security forces entered the chamber, and Jake felt Nicole tense beside him. The Vecreen Prime announced that a routine inspection of the horizon had revealed hidden weapon systems in violation of Council law. The evidence was displayed on massive screens around the chamber, showing what appeared to be military-grade plasma cannons concealed in the ship's cargo hold. Jake knew immediately that it was a lie. The Horizon was a diplomatic vessel with only basic defensive shields. Someone had planted evidence or fabricated the images entirely. He said so loudly and clearly, but his voice was drowned out by the sounds of judgment being passed. Council representatives voted quickly and overwhelmingly to find humanity guilty of espionage and conspiracy. Some species abstained from the vote, and the Tauran representative actually voted against the measure. But it did not matter. The verdict was decided before the vote even happened. Zerkath pronounced sentence. Commander Jake Morrison and his crew would be executed as examples to any who would challenge the authority of the Galactic Council. Sophie grabbed Jake's arm and Nicole moved to defend them, but there were too many security forces and their weapons were already trained on the human delegation. Dr. Henry Blake was speaking rapidly into his communicator, trying to contact Earth, but the signal was being jammed. Jake, Morrison's last thought before they took him away was that Earth needed to know what had happened here. The Galactic Council was not a force for peace and cooperation. It was an empire built on control and fear. Humanity needed to prepare for war because war was already coming, whether they wanted it or not. The execution was carried out publicly in the central plaza of Zentari Prime with representatives from every council species in attendance. Jake Morrison died standing up straight and refusing the blindfold they offered. His last words were transmitted back to Earth on every frequency. He said that humanity would never kneel and that the stars belonged to everyone who had the courage to reach for them. The news reached Earth 18 hours after Jake Morrison's execution, and the planet went silent for exactly 1 minute. Every television screen showed the same image of the commander standing straight and defiant in his final moments. Every radio broadcast carried his last words. Every digital display from Times Square to Tokyo showed humanity's first ambassador to the stars being murdered for refusing to surrender Earth's freedom. Then the silence broke and the world erupted in rage. President Linda Crawford sat in the command bunker 2 miles beneath the Rocky Mountains and watched her planet tear itself apart with grief and fury. Riots broke out in major cities as people demanded immediate retaliation against the Galactic Council. Military recruitment centers were overwhelmed with volunteers ready to fight. The United Nations building in New York was surrounded by crowds calling for war. Linda had been president for 6 years and had led Earth through economic collapse and environmental crisis and a dozen smaller disasters, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Admiral Kevin Price entered the command center and took his seat at the long table. He was followed by General Amy Foster, whose face looked like it had been carved from stone, and Director Charles Webb, who ran Earth Intelligence and knew more secrets than any human being should carry. They all knew what was coming next. They had prepared for this exact scenario, even though they had prayed it would never happen. Linda looked at each of them in turn, and then spoke the words that would change everything. She authorized activation of the Red Protocol. The Red Protocol had been developed 15 years earlier by a group of scientists and military strategists who understood that first contact with aliens might not go well. They had studied every science fiction scenario and every historical example of technologically advanced civilizations meeting less advanced ones. The results were not encouraging. Advanced civilizations either conquered or absorbed less advanced ones, and the weaker culture always lost something vital in the process. Earth's brightest minds had decided that humanity needed insurance against that outcome. Admiral Price entered the activation codes into the secure terminal, and across the solar system, dormant systems began waking up. The Exodus fleet had been hidden in the asteroid belt and the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and the dark reaches beyond Neptune. Hundreds of colony ships equipped with experimental faster-than-light drives that worked on principles the Galactic Council had never discovered. Each ship carried thousands of sleeping colonists and genetic samples and seeds and complete archives of human knowledge. If Earth fell, the species would survive scattered across the galaxy where the Council could never find them all. The Sentinel network came online next, and Director Webb watched the status screens light up green one by one. Automated weapons platforms positioned throughout the solar system and in deep space beyond. They were armed with antimatter warheads and relativistic kill vehicles and weapons that humanity had built in secret while pretending to be peaceful. The platforms were controlled by artificial intelligence systems that the Council would have banned if they had known about them. Those systems were now targeting every known Council military installation within 50 light-years of Earth. General Foster pulled up the tactical display and showed the Council fleet movements. 3 separate armadas were being assembled at staging points near Earth. The Vakreen were sending their grand fleet, which had not been fully mobilized in over 2,000 years. Other Council species were contributing ships and personnel, though intelligence suggested that some were doing so reluctantly. The combined force would number over 5,000 vessels, and they would arrive at Earth in approximately 72 hours. Linda asked the question that everyone in the room already knew the answer to. Could Earth win a defensive battle against those odds? Admiral Price was honest with her. No. The human fleet numbered just over 300 combat-capable ships, and while they were well-designed and well-armed, they could not stand against 5,000 enemy vessels. Earth's orbital defenses were strong, but not strong enough. The planet would be bombarded from orbit, and billions would die, and humanity would be enslaved or exterminated. Director Webb activated the holographic display and showed them something that made even General Foster smile. Red dots appeared across the galactic map, representing deep cover agents that Earth had embedded within alien civilizations over the past 2 years. Humans who had volunteered for extensive surgical modification and genetic manipulation to pass as other species. They had lived among the aliens and learned their secrets, and now they were sending back intelligence that could change everything. The Galactic Council was not as unified as it appeared. Many species resented Vakreen dominance and chafed under Council restrictions. The Tauran clans had almost gone to war with the Council 50 years ago over trade disputes. The Kryn Collective had been forcibly absorbed into the Council after their military was destroyed, and they still remembered. Smaller species lived in fear of being crushed if they stepped out of line. The whole system was held together by fear and tradition, and the overwhelming power of the Vakreen fleet. General Foster proposed a strategy that was either brilliant or insane, depending on how you looked at it. Earth would not wait to be attacked. The human fleet would strike first and strike hard at targets throughout Council space. Hit-and-run attacks designed to cause maximum damage and chaos. The Council expected humanity to either surrender meekly or defend Earth desperately. They would not expect humans to go on the offensive. The attacks would buy time for the Exodus fleet to scatter, and would demonstrate that humanity was not going to be an easy victim. Admiral Price began issuing orders to fleet commanders throughout the solar system. Captain Ryan Lee received instructions to take his destroyer squadron deep into Vakreen space and attack their homeworld directly. Lieutenant Commander Ashley Morgan was ordered to lead a strike team against the Council's primary communication relay at Nexus Station. Captain Victor Kane would mine the hyperspace lanes leading to Earth and turn them into kill zones. Dozens of other captains received similar orders, and every single one of them accepted without hesitation. The Exodus fleet began its launch sequence, and Linda watched on the monitors as colony ships started slipping away from their hiding places. Each ship took a different trajectory and would jump to a different distant star system. Some carried 10,000 sleeping colonists, while others carried only a few hundred, along with extensive genetic archives that could rebuild the human race if necessary. The ships were painted black to avoid detection, and their drives were shielded to minimize their energy signatures. They would scatter across 1,000 light-years and establish hidden colonies that would preserve humanity even if Earth burned. Linda knew that she would never see most of those colonists again. Her own daughter Kate was commanding one of the colony ships heading toward a star system 400 light-years away. They had said goodbye 2 days ago in a tearful video call where both of them had tried to be brave and failed. Kate had 3 children aboard her ship, including Linda's only grandchild, and Linda would never watch that child grow up. That was the price of survival. Director Webb received a priority message from one of his deep cover agents embedded in the Tauren clans. The Tauren ambassador to the Galactic Council had evidence that Jake Morrison had been framed. The weapons found on the horizon had been planted by Vakrine intelligence services. The whole trial had been a setup designed to justify eliminating humanity before they could become a threat to Vakrine dominance. Webb immediately began distributing that information to every species in the Council through back channels and encrypted communications. If they could split the Council, then maybe humanity had a chance. General Foster reported that the first human strike teams were in position and awaiting final authorization. Admiral Price confirmed that the Sentinel network was fully operational, and targeting solutions had been calculated for all priority targets. Director Webb stated that intelligence gathering was ongoing and more information was coming in every hour. Everything was ready. Linda Crawford took a deep breath and remembered Jake Morrison standing defiant in his final moments. She thought about the billions of humans on Earth who were looking to her for leadership. She thought about the colonists fleeing into deep space and the soldiers preparing to fight impossible odds. She thought about her daughter and grandchild, heading toward an uncertain future among distant stars. Then she gave the order to begin humanity's war for survival, and the solar system erupted into controlled chaos as Earth prepared to show the Galactic Council what happens when you execute a human envoy and expect the rest of humanity to submit quietly to tyranny. Captain Ryan Lee brought his destroyer Swift Justice out of faster-than-light travel directly above Vakrine Prime, and for exactly 3 seconds nobody on the planet below understood what was happening. The Vakrine homeworld had not been attacked in over 8,000 years, and their orbital defenses were designed to intercept threats coming from outside the system. Nobody had ever been crazy enough or stupid enough to jump directly into orbit above the most heavily defended planet in the galaxy. Nobody except humans who had just watched their ambassador get executed and were now beyond caring about what was smart or safe. Ryan's tactical display lit up with targeting solutions as his weapons. Officer locked onto every military installation in range, shipyards where Vakrine warships were being constructed, defense platforms that could destroy entire fleets. The Grand Orbital Station, where the Council's military command was coordinating the attack on Earth. All of it was about to burn. The Swift Justice opened fire, and 12 other human destroyers that had jumped in with her did the same. Plasma cannons tore through shields that had never been tested in actual combat. Missiles streaked across the void and detonated against hulls that were supposed to be invincible. Railgun rounds traveling at significant fractions of light speed punched through armor plating like it was paper. The Vakrine orbital defenses tried to respond, but they were positioned to shoot outward at approaching threats, and the human ships were already inside their firing arcs. Ryan watched his display as target after target went dark. A shipyard that had been building vessels for 3,000 years exploded in a cascade of secondary detonations. A defense platform that could have held off 100 ships died without firing a single shot. The orbital command station where Vakrine admirals had coordinated galactic military operations for millennia broke apart and tumbled toward the atmosphere, trailing debris and bodies. The attack lasted exactly 7 minutes, and then the human ships vanished back into faster-than-light travel before the Vakrine could organize a response. Ryan checked his casualty reports and felt his stomach twist. 3 of his destroyers had been destroyed in the fighting, and over 200 human crew members were dead. But the damage they had inflicted was catastrophic. Hundreds of Vakrine military vessels had been destroyed or crippled. The myth that the Council fleet was invincible had been shattered along with all those ships. Across the galaxy, similar attacks were happening at the exact same moment. Lieutenant Commander Ashley Morgan led her strike team into Nexus Station, which housed the Council's primary faster-than-light communication relay. Without that relay, the various council fleets could not coordinate their movements effectively. They would be reduced to using slower communication methods or sending messenger ships which would take hours or days instead of minutes. Ashley's team moved through the station corridors in full combat armor and encountered confused alien security forces who had no idea why humans were attacking them. The humans had trained for this mission for months, and every member of the team knew exactly where to go and what to do. They reached the relay core and planted charges while Ashley held off reinforcements with precision fire from her plasma rifle. The team extracted through a maintenance airlock just as the charges detonated, and the entire relay system went offline in a spectacular explosion of exotic matter and contained energy. Ashley's ship picked them up and jumped away before station security could lock down the docks. She had lost 2 team members in the attack, but the mission was successful. The Galactic Council was now deaf and blind across most of its territory. Captain Victor Kane commanded a squadron of stealth ships that specialized in mine-laying operations. His mission was to turn the hyperspace lanes leading to Earth into death traps. Victor's ships dropped sophisticated mines at precise locations along the routes that the Council fleet would have to use. The mines were almost impossible to detect until they activated, and when they did activate, they would tear holes in space itself and drag ships out of faster-than-light travel directly into antimatter explosions. Victor knew that mine warfare was considered dishonorable by most species and was technically banned by several galactic treaties. He also knew that the Council had executed Jake Morrison after a fake trial and was planning to exterminate humanity. Honor and treaties meant nothing in a war for survival. He deployed his mines with cold efficiency and felt no guilt about what would happen when Council ships started hitting them. Back on Earth, the Sentinel network proved its worth when a Vacrine advanced strike force tried to bombard the planet before the main fleet arrived. The Council ships emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system and began accelerating toward Earth. They expected to find a panicked planet with scattered defenses. Instead, they found automated weapons platforms that had been waiting for exactly this moment. The Sentinels launched relativistic kill vehicles, which were essentially dense metal rods, accelerated to 90% of light speed. At those velocities, the projectiles hit with the force of nuclear weapons, and there was no defense against them. The Vacrine ships detected the launch, but by the time their sensors registered the threat, the projectiles were already impacting. 5 Council ships were destroyed in the first salvo. 3 more died in the second. The survivors tried to retreat, but the Sentinels were faster and more accurate than any organic gunner could be. Only 2 ships escaped, and they fled back to Council space, carrying news that Earth was far more dangerous than anyone had expected. General Foster watched the battle reports coming in from across the galaxy and allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The opening strikes had exceeded expectations. Council military forces were in disarray. Their communication network was crippled. Their supply lines were being cut by human raiders who struck without warning and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. Species that had supported the Council out of fear were now reconsidering their positions. But the satisfaction was brief, because Foster knew that these early victories would not last. The full might of the Galactic Council was still gathering, and when it arrived, no amount of clever tactics would save Earth. The planet's orbital defenses had held against one small strike force, but they would not hold against 5,000 ships. The human fleet was scattered across the galaxy conducting raids and could not return to defend Earth without being hunted down and destroyed in detail. Admiral Price received intelligence reports from Director Webb's deep cover agents, and the news was mixed. The Tauran clans were openly questioning their participation in the attack on Earth. The Kryn Collective had quietly withdrawn their ships from the Council fleet. Several smaller species were demanding an investigation into Jake Morrison's trial, but the Vacrine were still determined to crush humanity, and they commanded enough firepower to do it. Regardless of who else participated, the Exodus fleet continued its dispersal, and by now over 300 colony ships had scattered to distant stars. Each ship carried a piece of humanity's future, and even if Earth fell, the species would survive. President Crawford received regular updates on the fleet's progress and tried not to think about how many of those colonists she would never see again. Her daughter, Kate, had reached the jump point for her assigned destination and sent a final message before making the leap to a star system that might not even have a name in Earth's databases. The message was simple. Kate thanked her mother for making the hard choices and promised that no matter what happened to Earth, the humans in her colony would remember where they came from. They would tell their children about the planet that gave birth to their species and the people who fought to keep it free. They would look up at the stars and know that somewhere among them was a small blue world where humanity had first learned to dream. Linda Crawford watched the message 3 times and then deleted it because she could not afford to break down. She had a planet to defend and a war to coordinate and millions of decisions to make. Grief was a luxury she could not afford. The Swift Justice and her surviving sister ships regrouped at a hidden base in a system 50 light-years from Earth. Captain Ryan Lee surveyed his battered squadron and knew they could not survive another attack, like the one on Vakreen Prime. His ships were damaged and his crews were exhausted and ammunition was running low. But Admiral Price's orders were clear. Hit the Council again and again and again until either Earth was saved or the human fleet was destroyed. Ryan checked his navigation computer and plotted a course toward the next target. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to address the crisis, and for the first time in thousands of years, the chamber was filled with angry voices demanding answers. How had a single species that had just achieved faster-than-light travel managed to strike at the heart of Council power? How had primitive humans managed to destroy hundreds of advanced warships? How had their communication network been so easily sabotaged? The questions came fast and furious, and the Vakreen leadership had no good answers. Zerkath was dead, and his replacement was a younger Vakreen named Corvell who had built his career on promises to maintain order and control. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so loud and chaotic in its 10,000-year history. Ambassador Krell of the Tauren clan stood at his podium and slammed his fist down hard enough to crack the ancient stone. He had been waiting for this moment for 50 years, and now he had the evidence he needed to finally challenge Vakreen authority. The data chip in his hand contained proof that Jake Morrison had been framed, and that proof had come from human intelligence operatives who had somehow managed to infiltrate Council security networks. Krell activated the holographic display, and every representative in the chamber watched as security footage played showing Vakreen agents planting weapons aboard the Horizon while it was docked at the orbital station. The timestamp showed the planting occurred hours before the inspection that supposedly discovered them. Other files showed communications between Zerkath and his intelligence chief, discussing how to manufacture evidence against the human delegation. The case against Jake Morrison had been a lie from the beginning. The chamber erupted into shouting. Species that had sent their ships to attack Earth based on Council orders now realized they had been manipulated into participating in what amounted to murder and attempted genocide. The Kryn representative stood up and announced that her people were immediately withdrawing all military support from the campaign against humanity. She called the execution of Jake Morrison a war crime and demanded that those responsible be held accountable. Corvell tried to restore order, but his voice was drowned out by angry accusations from dozens of species. The younger members of the Council were particularly furious because many of them had privately admired humanity's independent spirit and had been horrified by the harsh sentence. Now they knew that the whole thing had been orchestrated by Vakreen leadership to eliminate a potential threat to their dominance. The Tauren ambassador was not finished. He presented more evidence showing that the Vakreen had been systematically suppressing technological development among Council species for thousands of years. Any species that showed signs of advancing too quickly had their progress quietly sabotaged through economic pressure or strategic resource denial. The Vakreen maintained their position at the top of the galactic hierarchy by ensuring that nobody else could challenge them. Humanity's crime had not been aggression or law-breaking, but rather the unforgivable sin of developing faster than light travel without Vakreen permission or oversight. Several species immediately announced they were withdrawing from the Council entirely. Others demanded emergency votes on Vakreen leadership. The Grand Alliance that had maintained galactic peace for millennia was fracturing in real time. Corvell watched his power crumbling and made a desperate decision. If the Council would not follow him willingly, then the Vakreen would act alone. He ordered the Vakreen Grand Fleet to proceed with the attack on Earth regardless of whether other species participated. The Vakreen Armada was still the largest military force in the galaxy with over 3,000 warships. Corvell was convinced that overwhelming force would crush human resistance, and once Earth was destroyed, the rest of the Council would fall back in line. The other species would remember why they feared the Vakreen, and order would be restored. He refused to consider the possibility that destroying Earth might be the final act that turned the entire galaxy against his people. Admiral Price received the intelligence about the Council fracturing and knew it was both good news and bad news. The good news was that humanity would not be facing 5,000 ships but only 3,000. The bad news was that 3,000 Vakreen warships was still more than enough to reduce Earth to a lifeless rock. His scattered fleet could not return to defend the planet without being picked off one squadron at a time. The Sentinel network would fight hard, but it would not be enough. Earth needed a miracle, and Price did not believe in miracles. Director Webb contacted Price with information that might qualify as exactly that. One of his deep cover agents had made contact with a group called the Remnant. 500 years ago, the Vakreen had tried to exterminate an entire species called the Sorrow because they had refused to submit to Council authority. The Sorrow had supposedly been wiped out, but actually a few thousand survivors had escaped and gone into hiding in the darkest corners of the galaxy. They had spent 5 centuries nursing their hatred and building a fleet from salvaged technology and stolen resources. Now they were offering Earth an alliance against their mutual enemy. Price was skeptical because he had never heard of the Remnant and had no way to verify their story or their capabilities. Webb admitted that the intelligence was thin, but pointed out that humanity was in no position to turn down potential allies. Earth was facing extinction, and if the Remnant could provide even a small amount of additional firepower, it might make the difference between survival and annihilation. Price authorized contact, and within hours a Remnant delegation arrived at the human base using ships that looked like they had been cobbled together from parts of a dozen different civilizations. The Remnant commander called himself Kane, and he looked almost human except for the silver skin and eyes that seemed to see in more than 3 dimensions. He explained that his people had been watching humanity since first contact and had been impressed by their refusal to submit. The Remnant had no love for the Galactic Council and even less for the Vakreen. They were willing to commit their entire fleet to the defense of Earth in exchange for one thing. When the war was over and if humanity survived, they wanted help, establishing a legitimate homeworld where they could live openly instead of hiding in the shadows. Price agreed immediately because the terms were more than fair and because he had no other options. Kane warned him that the Remnant fleet numbered only 400 ships and many of them were outdated or barely functional. But they had one advantage that might prove decisive. The Remnant had been stealing Vakreen technology for 500 years, and they knew every weakness in Vakreen ship design. They knew how Vakreen shields could be bypassed and how Vakreen weapon systems could be jammed. That knowledge combined with human tactics and desperate courage might be enough. On Earth, the final preparations for the last battle were underway. President Crawford addressed the planet in a broadcast that was watched by every human who remained. She did not lie to them about the odds or pretend that victory was certain. She told them that the Vakreen fleet was coming, and that it might be powerful enough to overwhelm Earth's defenses. She told them that the Exodus fleet had successfully scattered, and that even if Earth fell, humanity would survive among the stars. She told them that every person who stayed to fight was a hero, and that their names would be remembered by every human child born anywhere in the galaxy for as long as the species existed. Then, she told them something that made billions of people stand up straighter and set their jaws with determination. She said that Jake Morrison had died standing up and refusing to kneel, and that every human on Earth would honor his memory by doing the same. If the Vakreen wanted Earth, they would have to pay a price so terrible that they would regret ever hearing the word human. The planet would not go quietly into the dark. Military volunteers flooded recruitment centers even though there was barely time to give them basic training before the battle. Engineers worked around the clock to repair damaged ships and manufacture more ammunition. Scientists activated experimental weapons that had never been properly tested because there was no time left for testing. Every orbital platform and every defense satellite and every missile battery on the surface was armed and ready. Earth was turning itself into a fortress, and everyone knew it probably would not be enough, but they were going to try anyway. Captain Ryan Lee received new orders to link up with the Remnant fleet and prepare for the final defense of Earth. His squadron was down to 8 ships and his crews were exhausted, but they acknowledged the orders without complaint. Ryan looked at the tactical display showing the Vakreen armada approaching and did the math in his head. Even with the remnant ships and the Sentinels and Earth's orbital defenses, the humans would be outnumbered 5-1. Those were the kind of odds that showed up in history books right before the chapter about extinction events. But Ryan had learned something important over the past few weeks of desperate fighting. The Galactic Council had ruled for 10,000 years because nobody had ever seriously challenged them. Their ships were powerful, but their tactics were predictable. Their commanders were experienced, but they were also arrogant. They expected other species to fight by their rules and to respect their traditions. Humans did not know the rules and did not care about traditions. That might be enough to surprise the Vakreen one more time. The remnant fleet arrived at Earth and took up positions alongside human vessels. Kane's flagship was a massive vessel built from the salvaged hulls of 3 different ship types, welded together in ways that should not have worked, but somehow did. It looked like something from a nightmare, but its weapons were real and its shields were strong. Admiral Price studied the combined fleet and allowed himself to hope that maybe they had a chance after all. The Vakreen armada emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system, in a formation that had been used to intimidate countless species for thousands of years. 3,000 warships arranged in perfect geometric patterns that demonstrated both overwhelming power and absolute discipline. Corvell sat in his command chair aboard the flagship Eternal Dominion and watched the tactical displays show him everything in the system. He saw the pitiful human defense fleet of barely 600 ships, including those strange vessels provided by the Remnant. He saw the automated defense platforms that humanity thought would save them. He saw a planet that was about to learn the price of defying Vakreen authority. Admiral Price stood on the bridge of his flagship Defiant and studied the same tactical situation from the opposite perspective. The numbers were bad, but he had fought with worse odds before. His strategy was simple because complicated plans fell apart in the chaos of battle. The human fleet would engage the Vakreen head-on and try to break their formation. The remnant ships would exploit the weaknesses that Kane's people had spent 500 years learning. The Sentinel network would provide supporting fire and eliminate any Vakreen ships that broke through toward Earth. It was not a good plan, but it was the only plan they had. The Vakreen fleet began its advance toward Earth in a slow, steady push that was meant to give defenders time to realize how hopeless their situation was and surrender. Corvell broadcast a message on all frequencies offering humanity one final chance to submit. He promised that if Earth yielded immediately, the population would be spared and relocated to reservation worlds where they could live under Council supervision. It was more mercy than the Vakreen usually offered, and Corvell thought he was being generous. President Crawford responded with a message of her own that was broadcast across every frequency and recorded for history. She said that humanity had not crawled out of caves and crossed oceans and reached for the stars just to live on their knees on someone else's world. She said that Earth would never surrender and never submit, and if the Vakreen wanted the planet, they were welcome to try taking it. Then she gave the order that every human ship and every defense platform and every weapon system had been waiting for. She told them to make the Vakreen regret ever hearing the name Jake Morrison. The human fleet accelerated toward the Vakreen armada at full speed and opened fire at maximum range. Plasma bolts and missiles and railgun rounds crossed the void between the two forces. The Vakreen returned fire with the casual confidence of a civilization that had never lost a major battle. Their weapons were more advanced, and their shields were stronger, and their ships were larger. By every logical measure, they should have cut through the human fleet like a blade through paper. But Captain Ryan Lee had been studying Vakreen tactics for weeks, and he noticed something important. The enemy formation was beautiful and impressive, but it was also rigid. The Vakreen ships maintained perfect spacing and perfect alignment because their doctrine had not changed in thousands of years. Ryan transmitted new orders to the human fleet, and the ships broke formation in what looked like complete chaos. They scattered and jinked and attacked from unexpected angles. The Vakreen tried to maintain formation while responding to threats from every direction, and their perfect geometric patterns began to fracture. The remnant fleet struck at exactly the right moment. Kane's ships knew where Vakreen shields were weakest and how to jam their targeting systems and which ship systems would fail first under sustained fire. 400 remnant vessels hit the Vakreen formation like a surgical strike aimed at its most vulnerable points. Explosions blossomed across the enemy fleet as ships that had been invincible for Millennia discovered that their technology was not as superior as they had believed. The Sentinel network opened fire and the automated platforms proved their worth. They did not get tired or scared or confused. They simply calculated firing solutions and launched relativistic kill vehicles with mechanical precision. Vacrine ships that broke through the human defensive lines ran straight into walls of projectiles traveling at 90% of light speed. The impacts were devastating, and the Vacrine advance began to slow as commanders realized they were taking far heavier casualties than expected, but the sheer weight of numbers was beginning to tell. Human ships were dying faster than they could be replaced. The Defiant took a direct hit that knocked out half her weapon systems, and Admiral Price had to transfer his flag to another vessel. Captain Ryan Lee's destroyer took critical damage and he ordered his crew to abandon ship before ramming the crippled vessel into a Vacrine battlecruiser at full speed. Both ships exploded in a fireball that could be seen from Earth's surface. The battle raged for hours and slowly the Vacrine were pushing closer to Earth. Corvell watched his casualty reports climbing higher than any battle in recorded history, but he was still winning. His fleet still outnumbered the defenders and his ships were still advancing. Soon they would be in range to begin orbital bombardment, and then this irritating species would learn their place. He ordered his weapons officers to prepare the trilithium warheads that would crack Earth's crust and make the planet uninhabitable. For 1,000 years, then something unexpected happened that changed everything. Captain Lisa Morgan had been Jake Morrison's second-in-command before his execution, and she had volunteered to lead the most dangerous mission of the entire war. While the space battle raged above Earth, she led a small team of commandos aboard a captured Vacrine shuttle that had been modified by remnant engineers. They used access codes provided by Director Webb's intelligence network and flew directly toward the Eternal Dominion, pretending to be a damaged, friendly vessel requesting emergency docking. The Vacrine were so focused on the battle that they allowed the shuttle to dock without proper inspection. Lisa and her team moved through the massive flagship's corridors using routes that had been mapped by spies and studied for weeks. They encountered security patrols and fought through them with the desperate efficiency of soldiers who knew they were not coming back. Half the team died reaching the bridge, but Lisa kept going because this was the mission that mattered more than anything else. Corvell looked up from his tactical displays when the bridge doors exploded inward and human soldiers poured through. He reached for a weapon, but Lisa shot him first. The Vacrine commander fell and Lisa immediately moved to the communication systems. She accessed the flagship's transmitters and broadcast Corvell's private logs across every frequency to every ship in both fleets. The logs contained his admission that humanity had been condemned not for crimes but for daring to develop independently. They contained his plans to use trilithium weapons against Earth in violation of every galactic treaty. They contained proof that the Vacrine had been manipulating and controlling the Council for their own benefit for thousands of years. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the Vacrine cause. Species that had been reluctant allies now openly mutinied. Ships that had been fighting alongside the Vacrine suddenly turned their weapons against them. The Tauran clan's fleet that had been held in reserve waiting for orders now jumped into the battle on humanity's side. The Kryn vessels that had supposedly withdrawn actually attacked Vacrine supply lines from behind. The entire enemy formation collapsed into chaos as the truth spread through their ranks. Vacrine commanders tried to maintain control, but their authority was gone. Some ships fled back toward their home systems. Others surrendered in place. A few die-hard loyalists kept fighting, but they were quickly overwhelmed by the combined forces now arrayed against them. The battle that was supposed to end with Earth's destruction instead ended with the Vacrine fleet in ruins, and the Galactic Council effectively dissolved. Admiral Price could barely believe what he was seeing on his tactical displays. Against every reasonable expectation, humanity had won. The cost had been terrible, with over half the human fleet destroyed and tens of thousands of casualties. Orbital bombardment during the early stages of the battle had killed millions on Earth's surface. But the planet still existed and humanity still drew breath, and that was more than he had dared hope for. When the battle began, President Crawford emerged from the command bunker and looked up at a sky filled with debris and the flashes of dying ships. Earth had survived, but it would bear the scars of this day forever. She received reports that Lisa Morgan and her entire commando team had died fighting their way off the Eternal Dominion, but their sacrifice had changed the course of the battle. Crawford made a note to ensure that Lisa received every honor that humanity could bestow because she had saved billions of lives. With her courage, the Exodus fleet received news of the victory, and some of the colony ships began the long journey back toward Earth. Others decided to continue toward their destination stars because spreading humanity across the galaxy was still the best insurance against extinction. Kate Crawford sent a message to her mother saying that her colony would name their first city Morrison in honor of the ambassador, whose death had started everything. She promised to raise her children with stories of Earth and the people who had refused to surrender their freedom.